Emma had always feared flying. It wasn't just a mild anxiety or butterflies in her stomach, it was a visceral terror that gripped her like an iron vice. She could recall every flight she had taken in her life, every trembling moment spent clutching the armrests, every prayer muttered under her breath as the engines roared to life. Flying to her was an unpredictable beast, one she barely survived with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Yet here she was, standing at the gate of an international airport, her boarding pass clutched tightly in her trembling hands. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glow over the waiting passengers, and the hum of conversations mingled with the faint mechanical whirring of the air conditioning. Emma tried to focus on anything other than the aircraft that awaited her, a sleek silver body that gleamed under the airport lights. But the closer she got, the heavier her chest felt, the tighter her throat became. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, though her voice sounded shaky, almost foreign. "I can do this. It's just another form of transportation, just metal and engines. It can't hurt me." Her steps were slow as she approached the plane, each footfall echoing in her mind like a drumbeat of dread. Flight attendants greeted her with cheerful smiles, their professionalism contrasting sharply with the storm of fear raging within her. She tried to return a polite smile, but it barely made it past her lips. As she settled into her seat by the window, she glanced out at the runway. The sun was dipping low, casting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. She wanted to savor the view, to distract herself with the beauty of the world beneath her, but all she could focus on was the knowledge that in a matter of minutes she would be hurtling through the air thousands of feet above solid ground. The plane's engines hummed to life, a deep, vibrating growl that reverberated through her chest. She gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart raced in sync with the engine's escalating roar. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, to feel the comfort of solid earth beneath her feet once more. But the boarding gate was behind her. Escape wasn't an option. The plane began to taxi. The vibrations under her seat sent shivers through her body. She closed her eyes, willing herself to remain calm, repeating the mantra she had learned from countless meditation exercises. Breathe, calm, control. But the deeper she tried to sink into control, the more her mind rebelled, flashing images of falling, of metal twisting midair, of fire and chaos. Then it happened. The moment the plane lifted off, something unexpected stirred within her. A warmth, soft and insistent, began to radiate from her chest. It traveled down her arms and legs, tingling in her fingers and toes. It wasn't the cold sweat of fear, it was different. Almost electric, almost alive. Emma's eyes flew open, and she saw the city beneath her stretching out endlessly, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. For a fleeting moment she didn't feel fear. She felt weightless, her breath caught, and she blinked rapidly, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. She looked at the seatbelt across her lap, the tray table in front of her, the other passengers who were obliviously chatting and scrolling on their devices. Everything was normal, everything was grounded, and yet something inside her whispered that nothing was as it seemed. The tingling sensation intensified. Emma's fingers hovered above the armrests without her consciously moving them. Her body felt lighter, as if gravity had loosened its grip. She tried to force herself to move, but even the smallest shift caused her to float slightly above the seat. Panic flared immediately, but it wasn't the fear she was used to. It was an astonished, almost reverent shock. "Am I flying?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her mind raced. "No, this can't be real. This is impossible." But her senses betrayed her. She could feel the airflow against her skin, the faint sway of the cabin as the plane leveled at cruising altitude. She looked around. The passengers were staring now, some gasping, some frozen in disbelief. Flight attendants had dropped their trays, eyes wide with shock. The hum of the engines suddenly seemed like a melody she could harmonize with, and then she rose higher, instinctively, cautiously. She floated above her seat, her eyes wide with wonder and fear. The plane jolted slightly, and instinctively she guided herself back toward the floor, stabilizing her movement. Every second was a delicate dance between awe and terror. Somehow, she found herself moving toward the cockpit. The door, usually a boundary between passengers and pilots, now seemed like an invitation. The pilots turned at the sight of her floating figure. The older co-pilot blinked, rubbing his eyes as if he were hallucinating. I don't know how this is happening," Emma stammered, her voice shaking but filled with an odd clarity. I can feel the plane, I can feel it." The plane shuddered violently, sending a jolt through everyone inside. A warning light blinked red. The engines sputtered. A panel erupted in sparks. Panic surged through the cabin. Emma's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear. It was focus. The warmth that had awakened in her chest earlier now surged like a river, spreading strength through her limbs. She instinctively raised her hands toward the controls, though she barely touched anything, and then, almost miraculously, the plane stabilized. Passengers gasped, flight attendants whispered prayers under their breath. The pilots stared at her, mouths agape. Emma herself could hardly comprehend what had just happened. She felt the plane's engines respond to her, the vibrations of the wings, the airflow over the fuselage, all like an extension of her own body. She had calmed the plane. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of wonder and disbelief. Emma didn't sit back down. She hovered, learning, feeling, understanding. Every dip of the aircraft, every turn in the air, every subtle vibration became her rhythm. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of courage began to sprout. By the time the plane began its descent, the sun had dipped completely below the horizon, and the city lights twinkled like a constellation of stars below. Emma guided herself gently back to her seat. She buckled herself in, though she felt almost as if the seatbelt was unnecessary. The other passengers stared at her. Why? Died whispers traveling from row to row. When the plane touched down safely, the applause that erupted from the cabin sounded surreal. Emma's legs trembled, not from fear this time, but from the incredible weight of what had just happened. She had faced her worst fear, not through avoidance or logic, but through something far greater, something inexplicable. She had flown, and not just in the plane. She had flown through her fear. Stepping off the aircraft, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The airport lights felt warmer somehow, the noise less jarring. People brushed past her, carrying their luggage, absorbed in their own lives, unaware that something miraculous had just occurred. Emma walked forward slowly, savoring each step. In that moment, she realized the truth she had always feared she would never face. Fear was powerful, but courage, true courage, was something else entirely. It wasn't the absence of fear. It was the willingness to rise above it, to embrace the unknown, and, if necessary, to let the impossible carry you higher than you ever imagined. The stranger's voice continued to rise, carrying through the frozen cabin like a fragile beacon in the midst of chaos. Rachel couldn't move fast enough toward him, but every step she took felt heavier, as though the air itself resisted her motion. Yet the hymn's effect was undeniable. It wasn't just comforting, it was commanding attention, pulling every frozen passenger, every rigid movement, into a thread of awareness. Rachel watched in awe as the droplets of water in the cup in front of her shivered, quivering like jelly, as though the melody itself resonated through them. A small, trembling laugh escaped her lips, a mixture of disbelief and relief. Could a song really influence the physical world in such a profound way? She didn't have time to rationalize. The truth was unfolding right before her eyes. The stranger's face was serene, almost ethereal, bathed in the cold cabin light. His eyes were closed, his lips moving in perfect harmony with the hymn that was now swelling into the hum of something divine. He didn't glance at the frozen faces around him, didn't acknowledge the panic or confusion, yet somehow he was connecting with everyone. Passengers began to react in subtle ways. The mother who had been frozen in mid-prayer slowly relaxed, her fingers unclenching. The child's toy hovering midair, wobbled slightly before settling into her tiny hands. The man across the aisle, whose water had been suspended like a glittering halo, exhaled in a slow, shivering release, droplets falling to the cup with soft plinks. Rachel felt a strange mix of hope and fear. She wanted to speak to the stranger, to understand him, to ask how such a simple thing could wield such power. But words seemed inadequate. She only nodded a silent acknowledgement and returned her attention to the passengers around her. Is it safe?" whispered a young woman from a few rows ahead, breaking the rigid spell she had been trapped in. Her voice trembled, fragile and uncertain. I think so," Rachel replied, unsure if her own voice was entirely believable. "Just keep listening." The stranger's hymn seemed to grow stronger. It wasn't just a song. It was a presence, tangible and enveloping. Rachel could feel it vibrate in her chest, in her limbs, in her very bones. The plane, still suspended midair, seemed to respond, shivering ever so slightly as if it recognized the rhythm of the voice and obeyed it. In the cockpit, Captain Harrington and First Officer Lynn stared at the frozen controls. The instruments flickered with indecipherable symbols, lights glowing and dimming in unnatural patterns. The pilot's hands hovered above the console, trembling, but he dared not move. Something about the stranger's hymn seemed to seep even into the aircraft's machinery. Rachel glanced at the pilot. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Harrington's eyes widened. "Yes, it's I don't know how, but yes. The engines, the systems, they're responding, slowly." The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. The hymn wasn't just calming fear. It was interacting with the frozen anomaly itself, probing it, nudging it. And somehow it was working, but not all passengers were as calm. Some were panicking internally, caught between hope and terror. A man near the emergency exit slammed his fists against the seat in front of him, groaning, a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Rachel moved toward him, urging him gently to sit, to breathe. "It's okay," she whispered. "Listen, just listen." The man's eyes were wild, but the tune reached him anyway. His body, rigid and tense, trembled with the invisible rhythm. Slowly, very slowly, he sank back into his seat, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Minutes, hours, time had lost all meaning, passed as the hymn wove through the cabin. The passengers were no longer entirely frozen. Movement returned in hesitant bursts. A hand twitched here, a shoulder relaxed there. Even the air itself seemed to regain subtle motion, a whisper of circulation through the once suffocating stillness. Rachel moved closer to the stranger, drawn by the almost hypnotic pull of the hymn. He was middle-aged, with graying hair and a calm, weathered face. There was something about him that radiated a quiet authority, not of rank but of inner strength. "Who are you?" she asked softly, leaning close enough for him to hear. He didn't open his eyes. "Just someone who remembers," he said simply. His voice, when he spoke, carried the same resonance as the hymn, as though even his words had weight. "Remembers what?" Rachel pressed, though a part of her feared the answer. He smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "That even in stillness hope can move mountains or plains." Rachel shivered, partly from awe and partly from the surreal truth of his words. She glanced around. The hymn had slowed the panic, yes, but the plane was still suspended, frozen mid-air, still at the mercy of some invisible force. The stranger's song had started the process, but it was far from over. Can you make it stop?" she asked, her voice trembling. He opened his eyes this time, clear, steady, unwavering. "I can only guide it. You, all of you, must let it in, trust it, believe in the song, in each other, in the rhythm of life itself. That is what unfreezes the world." Rachel realized that it wasn't just a hymn. It was a call to faith, to unity. Each passenger had a role, whether they understood it or not. Fear alone would not allow them to move. Only a collective acceptance, a surrender to hope, could lift the invisible chains that bound the plane. She took a deep breath and looked around. "Everyone," she said firmly, "listen, just listen, feel it, don't fight it." Some passengers obeyed immediately, closing their eyes. letting the melody fill their consciousness. Others hesitated, frozen in skepticism. Rachel moved among them, encouraging, guiding, her own fear tempered by determination. The stranger's voice continued, unwavering, threading through every corner of the cabin, and then it happened. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. The suspended droplets of water in cups began to descend, slowly at first, then with increasing speed until gravity seemed to reassert itself. A magazine fluttered from a passenger's lap and landed on the floor. The plane itself groaned, a low, metallic sound, as though awakening from a long slumber. Rachel's heart leapt. She could feel the tension in the fuselage decrease. The HIM was working. She could see it. Passengers were moving, stretching, blinking as if waking from a nightmare. The stranger's eyes opened fully now, locking onto hers. "It's not just me," he said. "It's all of you, one by one together. That is the power." Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never believed in miracles, in divine intervention, in anything beyond the tangible. But here, at 30,000 feet, suspended between life and something unexplainable, she had no choice but to believe. The plane shuddered again, stronger this time, as though the very fabric of reality was resisting and then relenting in response to the HIM. Slowly, gradually, the cabin lights returned to normal, the screens flickered back to life, and the hum of the engines regained its familiar rhythm. Rachel looked out the window. The clouds moved once more, drifting lazily across the horizon. The sun continued its climb. They were moving, they were alive, and the passengers, they were alive too. Not just physically, but emotionally. Fear had been tempered with hope, panic replaced with awe. They had survived the impossible, guided by the voice of a stranger who reminded them of something they had almost forgotten, that even in the face of inexplicable terror, human connection, faith, and belief could restore order. Rachel returned to her seat, exhausted but elated. The stranger closed his eyes again, lowering his hands to his knees, the HIM softening into a whisper. He wasn't a hero in the conventional sense, no accolades, no medals, but in that moment, he was the most powerful person in the plane, a guardian of hope in a frozen world. Captain Harrington's voice returned over the intercom, steady and professional, though his words carried the weight of their shared trauma. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are resuming normal flight. Please remain seated as we regain altitude and course. We appreciate your patience." The cabin erupted in quiet murmurs, relief washing over everyone. Rachel exhaled, feeling the tension drain from her body. She looked at the stranger one last time. He gave her a faint nod, eyes closed, a small smile playing on his lips. Rachel realized that no one on the plane would forget this day. Not the frozen stillness, not the fear, not the miraculous HIM that had saved them. It was a moment suspended in time, a shared miracle, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures, a song, a voice, a belief, could move forces far greater than oneself. And above all, Rachel knew this, the world had frozen, and a stranger's HIM had saved everyone. For the first time since the anomaly struck, there was movement, real, fluid, natural movement. The hum of the engines returned, the overhead lights regained their soft glow, and the cabin air began circulating again like a living thing waking from an unnatural sleep. Passengers cried, laughed shakily, hugged each other, or touched their own arms to confirm that they were, in fact, still alive. For a few breathtaking moments, relief washed over the plane like a warm, cleansing wave. But the moment passed quickly. Too quickly. Rachel noticed it first. The window beside her seat flickered just once, like a glitch in a digital image. She leaned forward, frowning. Outside, the clouds drifted normally until they didn't. One cloud froze. Not gradually this time, instantly. One moment it moved, the next it was perfectly still. Her stomach churned. She looked farther, another cloud froze. Then another, then a patch of sky, then part of the horizon. The world outside was glitching. It was as if reality were skipping frames, alternating between motion and stillness in stuttering, unnatural jolts. Rachel's eyes widened. No, 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 not again. 3 rows ahead. A passenger screamed. The plane dipped hard, so suddenly that passengers slammed against their seatbelts. Gasps, shrieks, and cries erupted in waves. The overhead bins rattled. Oxygen masks trembled in place, though they didn't fall. Ladies and gentlemen, brace just momentary. The pilot's voice stuttered like a broken recording. The plane lurched a second time, more violently. Some passengers hit their heads against seats. The aisle lights flickered wildly. The stranger, who had stopped singing, opened his eyes. He frowned. Rachel hurried toward him, stumbling as the plane jolted. What's happening again? You fixed it. I thought you fixed it. His eyes held an unsettling calm. I didn't fix anything, he said. I only delayed it. Rachel's heart dropped. What do you mean? He looked forward, as though staring through the walls of the aircraft. The anomaly never left, he whispered. It only stepped back. Rachel felt cold all over. Why is it coming back? Because it wasn't just affecting the plane. He replied. It was affecting the sky. The lights flickered again, the plane tilted sharply, and oxygen masks dropped with a violent clatter, dangling like limp marionettes. Passengers screamed, grabbing the masks. Babies wailed. A man sobbed uncontrollably. A flight attendant shouted instructions, voice cracking. Rachel grabbed a mask and slipped it over her face, but her eyes never left the stranger. Tell me what we're dealing with, she demanded. What is this anomaly? He hesitated, then spoke softly. Something that should not exist. A fracture, she echoed. In what? Space-time, in everything, he said simply. Before Rachel could respond, the intercom crackled violently. Mayday, Flight 87 losing lift. Controls freeze-ing again, request assist Ank, the message cut out. Then the engines died, not slowly, instinctively, terrifyingly instantly. The plane dropped like a stone. Dozens of passengers screamed in unison. Some lifted off their seats as gravity lagged behind. Loose items floated momentarily before slamming back down. Rachel's ears filled with roaring silence, an impossible sound that made her blood run cold. The stranger closed his eyes again. He began to sing, not softly this time, with urgency, with force. His hymn surged through the cabin like a wave of pure resonance. It vibrated through the seats, the cabin walls, the passengers' bones. Every note carried weight and meaning, like an echo from another world. The plane slowed not through engines or mechanical thrust, but as though something unseen held it aloft, resisting the plunge. Passengers gasped in awe and terror as gravity steadied. Rachel clung to the seat in front of her, eyes locked on the stranger, heart pounding in her throat. You're doing it again, keeping us alive, but it's not enough, is it? His voice trembled only slightly. No, not for long. This is worse than before. As he sang, overhead lights brightened and dimmed as if syncing with the melody. The cabin seemed to shift subtly, colors flickering, outlines blurring. For a moment, Rachel thought she saw something impossible, the aisle stretching unnaturally long, like the plane had doubled in length. She blinked, and it snapped back, but the terror stayed. The stranger stopped singing abruptly. No, Rachel grabbed his arm. Why did you stop? Keep singing. He shook his head. Singing alone can't fix a fracture. To repair something this deep, you must understand what caused it. Rachel's voice broke. Then tell us. He looked around at the terrified passengers, then at the trembling aircraft that was barely holding itself aloft. Something on this plane, he said slowly, should not be here. Rachel stared, confused. What, a person, an object? Yes, he answered. But we must find out which. Before she could question further, the plane jolted violently hard enough that several unbuckled passengers were thrown from their seats. A woman crashed into the aisle, screaming as she slid forward. A man hit his shoulder against an armrest with a sickening crack. The oxygen masks swung wildly. Rachel dropped to her knees and reached the fallen woman, helping pull her back toward her seat. "It's okay. Hold on to something." The stranger stood steady, unmoving, almost untouched by the turbulence. Rachel watched him in awe and dread. He wasn't normal. She knew that now. No human could stand like that in this chaos. He raised one hand and touched the cabin wall lightly. The entire fuselage hummed. Passengers gasped as the wall shimmered faintly, distorting as though it were being viewed underwater. "What are you doing?" Rachel whispered. "Listening," he said. "The fracture has a voice, too." The turbulence grew worse. Luggage fell from bins. Lights flickered so fast the cabin strobed. The plane tilted sharply, spiraling in a slow, sickening arc. The stranger's eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. "I know what caused it," he said. Rachel rushed to him, grabbing his sleeve. "Tell me." "It's not the sky," he murmured, "not the plane, not time." He turned toward the back of the aircraft. "It's a soul." Rachel froze. "A soul one that has been displaced, one that does not belong to this world anymore." Her breath caught. Goosebumps crawled up her arms. "Are you saying someone on this plane is dead? Worse," he whispered. "Someone on this plane wasn't meant to exist at all. A presence from a time that no longer exists. What does that even mean?" she gasped. But she already sensed the answer, an impossible truth, a horror deeper than she could comprehend. Someone on this plane, the stranger said quietly, is living in the wrong timeline. The plane dropped again, screams erupting as gravity spasmed. The stranger steadied himself with one hand on a seat. "This anomaly," he continued, raising his voice over the chaos, "is reality trying to correct itself." Rachel stepped back, shaking her head. "You mean reality is attacking us?" "Yes," he said, trying to erase the inconsistency. She felt her knees weaken. "Who is it, this displaced soul?" His eyes softened. "I don't know yet, but I can feel its presence now." Another violent jolt rocked the plane. Panels cracked, a few ceiling tiles broke loose and fell. Passengers cried and prayed. A baby screamed uncontrollably. A man fainted. Rachel gripped the seat beside her, heart racing. "Then how do we find the person?" she shouted. The stranger took a slow breath. "We follow the fracture." Before she could ask how, the aisle lights flickered, one by one, starting from the back of the plane and racing forward like dominoes. The lights didn't just dim, they went black, swallowed by something darker than absence. Passengers shrieked as the darkness approached row by row. It wasn't just shadow, it was a presence, cold, heavy, hungry. The stranger stepped forward, facing the oncoming void. "It's coming," he whispered. "It's coming for the anomaly." Rachel grabbed his arm. "For the person or for all of us." He met her gaze. "If it cannot find the right one, it will take everyone." The cabin lights had been dimmed for the long, haul overnight flight, casting soft amber glows along the curved ceiling. Flight 829 from New York to Istanbul had leveled out at cruising altitude 35,000 feet above a world that now seemed impossibly far below. The engines hummed with a low, calming drone, the kind that usually made passengers fall asleep within minutes. But for Amelia Carter, a 28-year-old first-time mother traveling alone with her 4-month-old son Luca, this was not a peaceful night. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders ached, and her mind was overwhelmed with the amount of responsibility she suddenly found herself carrying. Her husband Aaron was supposed to travel with them, a long, planned trip to Istanbul to visit Aaron's family. But at the last moment, due to a passport issue and an urgent work complication, he couldn't board. They had already postponed the trip twice. The third cancellation would disappoint his family again. So Amelia insisted she would go alone with the baby. Now, as she sat in the narrow airplane seat in row 23, she regretted that confidence a little. Luca shifted restlessly in her arms, letting out a small squeak before settling back down. Amelia gently rocked him, her hand brushing his soft hair. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just sleep, please sleep." Her voice was exhausted but tender. The seat beside her, 23B, was occupied by a man in his mid-30s. Tall, calm, dressed simply in a dark blue sweater and jeans. His name, as Amelia vaguely recalled from boarding, was Daniel Hale. He had offered her a kind smile when she sat down earlier, but he hadn't talked much since then. He carried only a laptop bag and a paperback novel. He didn't seem like someone who wanted to bother anyone. But he noticed things every time Amelia struggled with baby bottles, blankets, or the diaper bag stuffed under her seat. Daniel's eyes flicked in her direction, not in irritation, but in concern. He had seen fatigue before. He recognized the quiet panic of someone trying desperately not to become a burden. Amelia, meanwhile, tried her best not to look like she was falling apart. An hour into the flight, the cabin crew began passing out dinner trays. The smell of warm bread and pasta drifted through the aisle. Some passengers perked up. Others kept their eyes on their screens. Amelia swallowed. She wasn't sure how she would eat with Luca in her arms. He had refused to sleep in the bassinet earlier, crying loudly enough that she finally took him back into her lap. Daniel had noticed that too. The flight attendant leaned down beside her. "Ma'am, would you like your dinner now? Or I can bring it later if you prefer." Now is fine," Amelia said, even though she had no idea how she'd manage it. The tray was lowered in front of her, while she tried to balance Luca with one hand. Her fork clattered awkwardly. The baby stirred, then whined. A few seconds later, his small face turned red. Then he began to cry, loudly, hard, the kind of cry that turned heads, the kind that pierced straight into a mother's bones. People began glancing over their shoulders. Amelia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She bounced him gently. "SHH, baby, it's okay. But Luca cried harder, louder, arching his back in discomfort. It was too much. Amelia was exhausted, hungry, overwhelmed, and now every pair of eyes around her felt like a spotlight. Suddenly, a calm male voice beside her spoke. "If you want," Daniel said softly, "I can hold him while you eat." Amelia froze. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His expression was gentle, open, not pushy. His eyes were warm, not judgmental, but she hesitated. He was a stranger on a plane, holding her child. She shook her head out of instinct. "No, I can manage," she whispered, bouncing Luca frantically even though she clearly couldn't. Daniel didn't pressure her. He simply nodded and turned slightly away, giving her space, but Luca's cries only grew more desperate. The flight attendant came again. "Ma'am, is everything all right? I can take your tray back if—" Amelia forced a smile. No, I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Her hands trembled. Her stomach growled. Her eyes filled with hot tears. She tried to blink away. She hated that she was falling apart in public. On a plane, trapped with no escape, Daniel noticed all of it. "May I try something?" he finally asked. Amelia looked up sharply. He held his hands open, offering but not insisting. She hesitated again, torn between fear and desperation. Daniel added quietly, I have a niece. She's 6 months old. I help my sister with her all the time. I understand if you don't want to, but I promise I'll be careful. His voice was gentle, steady, confident, a kind of confidence that came from familiarity, not arrogance. Another loud wail from Luca made Amelia flinch. Finally, she exhaled shakily. Okay, just for a minute. Daniel nodded, slow and reassuring. Amelia carefully passed Luca into his arms, and something extraordinary happened. The crying stopped. Instantly, Luca blinked up at Daniel, confused for a moment, then let out a tiny hiccup and snuggled his face against Daniel's chest. Daniel chuckled softly. Hey there, buddy. Amelia's mouth fell open. Her arms, suddenly empty, felt weightless and foreign. How did you do that? She whispered. I think he just needed a new view, Daniel said with an easy smile. Babies are unpredictable. He cradled Luca with experienced hands, supporting his head gently. His posture was relaxed, natural, like he'd done this 100 times before. Amelia stared in disbelief. For the first time in hours she could breathe, eat. Daniel encouraged, nodding toward her tray. She blinked out of her shock and began to eat, fumbling with the fork at first. But within minutes she finally tasted the warm pasta and felt tears of relief prickling her eyes. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. As she ate, Daniel held Luca securely, gently patting his back and humming softly. The baby relaxed completely, drifting into a peaceful half-sleep. Amelia watched in awe. You're amazing, she said quietly. Daniel smiled. Just human, we all need a little help sometimes. His words were simple, but they landed heavily, like he meant something far deeper. For the next 20 minutes, Amelia finished her meal while Luca slept soundly in Daniel's arms. Her muscles slowly unwound. Her heart rate returned to normal. When she finally wiped her mouth and leaned back, she whispered, Thank you, really, you saved me back there. Daniel shook his head. No, you're doing great. Traveling with a baby alone, that's real courage. She smiled weakly. Feels more like madness. They chuckled softly together. Just then the plane rattled slightly with mild turbulence. A few passengers murmured. The captain's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are passing through a rough patch. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The turbulence got stronger, enough to make cups rattle and overhead bins creak. Amelia tensed immediately. Her grip tightened on the armrest. She hated turbulence. It made her stomach twist and her mind spiral into fear. Luca felt the change and whimpered again, shifting in Daniel's arms. Easy, it's just some bumps, Daniel murmured, more for Amelia's reassurance than the baby's. She looked at him anxiously. You're calm. He shrugged lightly. I fly a lot for work. You get used to these little mood swings in the atmosphere. She tried to breathe normally. But a sudden sharp dip made her gasp involuntarily. Daniel glanced at her. You're afraid of flying. It wasn't a question. A little, she admitted shakily. Then just focus on me, he said simply, not the plane. She blinked at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. Before she could respond, the turbulence intensified again. Loud rattling, jolting, unsettling enough to make passengers grip their seats. Luca whimpered louder. Amelia reached out instinctively. Here, let me take him. But the plane shook violently at that moment. And something happened, something none of them expected. The lights flickered, the engines roared unevenly. A warning chime sounded through the cabin. People gasped, a baby screamed, someone prayed loudly in another row. Amelia's heart stopped. A flight attendant grabbed the seat back to steady herself. Daniel looked up sharply, alert, tense. Then the captain's voice came on again, this time strained and urgent. Cabin crew, take your seats immediately. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Daniel with wide, terrified eyes. What's happening? She whispered. Daniel didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because something far worse had begun. Something none of them could have predicted. Something that would turn this flight into a moment that would be remembered forever, and before the night was over Daniel's presence would become the only reason Amelia's baby survived.